Epstein and the media, the continuous circus. If you open your phone anytime in the past couple of weeks, you've probably seen it. The Epstein files. Again. A fresh release, a fresh wave of headlines, a fresh cycle of this changes everything. And then the same feeling, too much, too fast, too messy. Because when you dump millions of pages into the public arena, clarity is least guaranteed. You get a scramble. On January 30th, 2026, the US Department of Justice said it published a massive batch, millions of pages, plus videos and images, in what it described as compliance with the Epstein File Transparency Act. Almost immediately, coverage splintered into what the internet does best: the sensational highlight, the political knife fight, and the list obsession. Who's named, who's redacted, who's next. Meanwhile, the deep questions: how did this persist? Who enabled it? What did institutions fail to do? What systemic imbalances were foundational to this tentacular network? And why did it take so long to break? Gets less oxygen than the circus. This video isn't a recap of every new headline. It's a cautionary tale about how modern media turns certain stories into an endless live spectacle, and how that spectacle can actually make accountability harder. The thesis: spectacle creates heat, not light. Here's the core argument: Epstein is the perfect storm for live news failure. The facts are indeed horrific and the names are powerful. But most importantly, our media system is optimized for constant updates, not slow understanding. And research backs up the idea that breaking style coverage pushes audiences towards sensation and away from trust. One 2023 study by Pello, Pop, Stanescu, and Sander found that breaking news framing on social media increases perceived sensationalism and can reduce trust in the actual content. So Epstein becomes the hook, but the real story is lost in the machine. What's new? The latest release, aka the latest flare up. Let's anchor this in what just happened. On January 30th, 2026, the DOJ announced the publication of roughly 3.5 million pages total released under the Act, plus videos and images. In early February, coverage surged again as lawmakers and media outlets argued over redactions, completeness, and what the releases do or don't prove. On February 10th, 2026, reporting highlighted lawmakers naming individuals they said had been redacted, while also stressing that being named in the files does not equal guilt. In the middle of all that, media packages and viral segments are trying to process huge volumes of footage and documents, sometimes in ways that are genuinely helpful and sometimes in ways that just feed the frenzy. This is the pattern: release, flood, frenzy, fatigue, repeat. While drops become spectacle, in theory, a big document release is a public good: sunlight, transparency, accountability. In practice, big releases often behave like what researchers call a media storm: a sudden surge of intense attention that skews coverage toward a narrow set of angles, often crowding out everything else. Back in 2024, in the Political Communication Journal, Boyston, Hardy, and Walgrave described how storms can dominate the agenda and reshape what gets covered and how. And storms have gravity. Once they start, everything gets sucked into them: partisan framing, celebrity agency, conspiratorial speculation, and the dopamine loop of a new detail just dropped. So we get a lot of who's on the list instead of what did institutions fail to do. And we get the juiciest excerpt instead of what structural protections were actually missing. The scandal becomes the content. Mechanism number one: breaking news incentives. Live news has a built in problem: it needs motion. A story that truly requires patience and verification is, by nature, bad for the format. Breaking coverage encourages speed, repetition, and reactive framing. And the research angle here matters. That breaking label doesn't just signal urgency, it can change how people perceive credibility. The 2023 study I mentioned earlier found a pathway where breaking news cues increase perceived sensationalism, which then lowers trust. Now, put that in Epstein context. You're dealing with fragmented documents, partial context, political actors, and a public that's been trained by the internet to treat every new drop as a final reveal. So the incentive is be first, be loud, be shareable, not be correct, be careful, be complete. Mechanism number two, overload creates avoidance. Here's the paradox. Epstein coverage is everywhere, and people still feel like they understand nothing. This is me. I'm the people. I know I'm supposed to be the media expert here, but listen, I've checked out many times. That's information overload. When the volume and intensity of information outpaces people's ability to process it. There is a growing research base linking overload to news avoidance. People do care, but they feel they can't do anything with the information or they can't properly sort what actually matters. A longitudinal study in Journalism and Mass Communication Quarterly looked at issue level overload and found connection between overload and avoidance dynamics. A 2021 research from the Netherlands on news avoidance during the COVID-19 crisis shows how sustained high intensity coverage can push people to disengage. And Peter Gordon Rothschild published in Business Research a broader work on information overload that maps out how overload affects decision making and well-being. Now, when you connect that to the current moment, the DOG release is enormous. Most people cannot read it. Most newsroom cannot fully process it at speed. So audiences do what humans do under cognitive stress. They grab onto shortcuts. Tell me one shocking line. Tell me one famous name or a few. And tell me one theory that explains everything. This is how brains cope when they are overwhelmed. Pew has tracked declining attention to news overall in recent years as of 2025, which matters because a constant scandal cycle can train people to tune out. Mechanism number three, conspiracy, gravity, and political theater. Epstein sits at the peculiar intersection of power, secrecy, and real institutional failure, which makes it uniquely vulnerable to conspiratorial framing. And once conspiratorial frames take hold, they're sticky. They offer emotional certainty. Someone is in control. Someone is hiding it. Someone can be blamed. Issued in 2023, psychological research on conspiracy beliefs shows that people can even endorse contradictory conspiracy ideas, suggesting that the belief often functions more like a signal of distrust than a coherent factual claim. And online platforms can amplify this, including through visibility dynamics that shape who sees what and how community grow around a narrative. As showcased in the December 2025 paper, Effects of the Algorithmic Visibility on Conspiracy Communities, so the files become less about the victims, less about trafficking, less about the actual record, and more about fractional storytelling. That's how you end up in a world where it becomes, as critics have put it, hard to even discuss Epstein without stepping into theater. The story is instantly drafted into someone's broader political script. So, what will depth actually look like? What will non-circus coverage actually prioritize? Number one, victims and harm, not voyeurism. What systems failed to protect people? What incentives allowed abuse to continue? Second, institutions and accountability. What happened with prosecutors, deals, gatekeeper, and enforcement? Why did it take so long for major investigations to gain traction? And we're not just talking about individual being bribed or influenced. We are also talking about the entire systems, allowing it to happen in the first place. If the institutions are stronger, it's inevitably going to supersede individual greed. Number three, the media's own role. How did power shape coverage? Who benefited from silence and minimization? With multiple reports of Epstein's massive influence on media outlets, it's impossible not to question what we consume and the powers behind it. That's why the history matters. Some of the most consequential reporting in this story wasn't the loudest. It was the slowest, long investigations, document work, source building, persistence. File drops can help, but only if they're treated as raw material for real reporting, not as the content event. How do we escape the circus? Let's try to see it like this, not just as a scandal. It's a stress test, and we are all failing miserably. It tests whether news media can resist turning trauma into entertainment, whether audiences can resist outrage as a hobby, and whether accountability survives in an ecosystem designed for speed. Here's a takeaway. When the next big drop hits, the question shouldn't be, what is the wildest detail? Let's try and focus on the most important thing this reveals about systems and what would change if we collectively took it structurally and seriously. Because when we see breaking news, spectacle feels like justice, but justice is actually slow, specific, and deeply unviral.